You've seen it in the movies, that dusty street under a burning orange sky. A lone cowboy steps through the saloon doors, spurs clinking, eyes scanning for trouble. A shootout at high noon, a horse galloping into the sunset. Freedom etched into every frame. It looks raw, romantic, dangerous in just the right way. But here's the truth. If you had actually lived there, if you had even set foot in that world for a single day, you wouldn't have made it out. The Wild West wasn't a postcard from history. It was a trap wrapped in dust and desperation. Behind every storybook image stood a brutal reality most people today couldn't stomach, let alone survive. Think you'd be the hero with a quick draw and a sharp tongue? Think again. There were no rules to play by, no clean fights, and no second chances. And the minute you stepped off the train, it hit you. Not a gunshot. Not yet. Something worse. The smell. A wave of rot, sweat, manure, and unwashed humanity rolled over you like a punch. There were no paved streets, just mud, broken boards, and the stench of animals, alive and dead. Horses relieved themselves where people walked. Trash piled up behind ramshackle buildings. Flies buzzed in black clouds. And somewhere nearby, someone was already yelling, already drunk, already armed. You look for order, for someone in charge, maybe a sheriff in a starched vest with a badge. You'll be looking a long time. Law existed more as an idea than a presence. If someone wronged you, your choices were few. Draw your weapon, keep your mouth shut, or leave town. People disappeared and no one asked questions. There were no investigations, just graves, shallow ones, and stories that change with each retelling. Strangers eyed you like you were a walking opportunity. Your clothes, your boots, even the contents of your pockets marked you as either a threat or a target. You walked fast, head down, pretending you belonged, but you didn't. Everyone could tell. Your posture, your hesitation, your soft hands. You weren't from here, and this place had a way of chewing up outsiders before they even found a bed to sleep in. And speaking of sleep, if you thought you'd be checking into a cozy inn or lighting a fire in a frontier cottage, you were already dreaming. But that part comes later. For now, the sun's getting low. Someone's following you, and the noise behind the saloon has stopped. You might think, in a place this rough, at least there'd be someone to patch you up when things go wrong. A healer, a clinic, anything. But here, pain was private, and suffering was just another part of life. There were no sterile rooms, no white coats, no waiting lists. Just a man with blood on his apron and a pair of pliers that looked like they belonged in a blacksmith shop. Toothache? Hope you like whiskey. That's your anesthetic while someone pries your molar loose with whatever tool happens to be nearby. Broken bone? If it's bad, they might cut it off to stop the rot. No clean saw, no clean anything. Just grit your teeth and pray the fever doesn't come. Because when it does, it comes hard and fast. People dropped like flies to things you wouldn't even blink at today. A scratch from a rusty nail could spiral into a swollen limb, then a wound that wouldn't close, then a quiet goodbye behind a curtain. Fever had no mercy. Cholera and dysentery tore through towns, spread by hands that never knew soap and wells tainted by livestock upstream. There were no antibiotics, no rehydration drips. Just whatever homemade potions someone swore worked once. On a cousin in another county. Women faced a different battlefield. Childbirth here wasn't a moment of joy. It was a gamble. There was no trained midwife in most places, just neighbors and hope. If something went wrong, and it often did, there was nothing anyone could do. And the children who made it into the world, many didn't stay long. A cold could take them, a rash, a cough. You learned not to get too attached too fast. There was no safety net, no second opinion. Pain became background noise, and people learned to live with things that should have sent them straight to a hospital. Infections swelled under skin and burst. Limps became permanent. And no one asked questions about your scars. They just assumed you were lucky enough to still be standing. In this town, the strongest weren't always the ones with the fastest draw. They were the ones who could take the most punishment and still get up the next day. But even they had no guarantees, because here, health wasn't a right, it was a miracle. And you You haven't even been here 24 hours. Food wasn't something you enjoyed out here. It was something you endured. You didn't eat to savor, you ate to survive. Breakfast might be a tin of beans gritty with ash from the fire. Lunch, if you had it, was likely more of the same. Maybe some hardtack so stale it could chip your tooth. Dinner? Salt pork, thick with fat and age, or a stew made from whatever creature was unlucky enough to get caught that day. Fresh vegetables were a fantasy, fruit was a story, and milk, only if your cow hadn't wandered off or died in the night. There were no balanced diets, no nutritionists planning meals. Just whatever you could carry, trade for, or shoot. The flour was often filled with weevils. Butter spoiled before it could be eaten. And anything green that might have grown in a backyard garden had to survive the same scorching sun, the same dry soil, and the same thieving hands that plagued every other part of life here. Your body didn't get what it needed. Teeth rotted. Skin broke out in sores. Muscles weakened. Eyes dimmed. Scurvy wasn't just for sailors. It lived here too. And if the food didn't get you, the water might. Wells were few. Rivers were brown with silt, waste, and sometimes worse. Animals died in them. People bathed in them. You drank anyway because there was no other choice. And when your stomach turned inside out the next morning, you just tried to make it through the day. There were no pharmacies, no pills, just whatever bottle the barkeep slid across the counter, whiskey for the pain, whiskey for the cold, whiskey to help you sleep when your belly twisted and your head pulsed with fever. Some called it medicine. Most knew it wasn't, but drank it anyway because it was better than nothing. Out here, survival was measured in bites, sips, and what you could keep down. And if the hunger didn't wear you down, the hopelessness of another tasteless, colorless, joyless meal just might. When the day finally ends, and out here, it doesn't end with a soft sunset but with exhaustion hitting like a hammer, you start thinking about sleep. Not rest, not comfort, just the act of collapsing somewhere and hoping you make it to morning. That's the bar, and even that's not guaranteed. Forget any modern idea of a bedroom. There's no mattress waiting, no fresh sheets, no pillow. If you're lucky, you find space on a wooden plank inside a bunkhouse shared with a dozen other souls, all snoring, coughing, muttering in their sleep. More likely, it's a tent, a barn corner, or a hastily built shack with gaps in the walls wide enough to see the moonlight through. Every surface you might sleep on is alive, with bugs, with damp, with the scent of sweat that seeped into the very wood. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a pile of straw stuffed into a sack, thrown onto uneven boards. And that straw, it's been used. Again and again. It crawls with lice, with fleas, with every biting thing that makes you itch through the night. You try not to think about what's already nesting in it. You try not to think about who slept there last, or what they left behind. When winter comes, the cold doesn't knock. It slams the door open and climbs into bed with you. There's no insulation, no central heat. Just your coat and the bodies next to you. You sleep in everything you own, curled tight, trying to conserve warmth. Your breath fogs the air, your fingers stiffen, and if your boots froze while you slept, you'll find out the moment you try to put them on. In the summer, it flips. The heat becomes unbearable. The walls, if there are any, trap it inside like a furnace. Sweat soaks your clothes, flies buzz constantly. Mosquitoes swarm at dusk and stay through dawn, drilling into every inch of exposed skin. The air smells of bodies, of dirt, of animals penned just feet away. Sleep becomes a battle, not a relief. You swat, you shift, you scratch, and maybe, if you're lucky, you forget for a moment where you are. There's no quiet here. People mutter in their sleep, sometimes scream. Someone coughs, a wet, rattling sound that never seems to end. Another snores like a saw through timber. Dogs bark outside. Horses stomp and whinny. Somewhere in the distance, a fight might break out, or a gun might go off, or a woman might cry. No one checks, no one gets up. Everyone knows it's better not to get involved after dark. Privacy doesn't exist. You share everything, your space, your noise, your air. In a world where everyone's trying to survive, solitude is a luxury no one can afford. You learn to sleep shoulder to shoulder with strangers, to change clothes under a blanket, to relieve yourself in a bucket or behind the building, hoping no one's watching. It's not about dignity. That word doesn't stretch this far. Sometimes, if you're flush with coin, you might rent a room above a saloon. It comes with a thin mattress, a creaky frame, and walls so thin you hear everything. Every deal, every argument, every regret. The sheets haven't been changed in weeks, the window doesn't open, and the floorboards sag. But it's dry, and it's yours. For a night, maybe two. And then it's back to the bunks, to the heat, to the cold, to the bugs. You start to understand slowly how sleep becomes something you take in fragments. A few minutes here, an hour there, a nap with one eye open. Because deep rest means vulnerability. And vulnerability can cost more than just comfort. Out here, even dreams aren't safe. You came out here to work, didn't you? Maybe to build a better life, to claim your slice of the frontier dream. But on the Wild West's unforgiving edge, work wasn't a path to prosperity. It was a gamble with your life as the stake. Every job, no matter how ordinary it sounded, had one thing in common. It could end you by sundown. Start with the farmers, sounds simple. Till the land, plant the seeds, wait for the harvest. But that land didn't give anything for free. It was hard, cracked, sun-baked. You fought it with your bare hands and rusted tools, and often lost. One slip of an axe, one infected blister, one overturned plow, and the dream bled into the dirt. And that was just the start. There were dust storms, flash floods, and hail the size of fists. Crops died without warning. So did people. Maybe you thought mining was the real money. Gold, silver, precious veins of hope running deep beneath the mountains. But mines were tombs in waiting. Men vanished in shafts that collapsed without a sound. Gas built up silently, then exploded. Ladders snapped, ropes frayed, carts derailed. You worked by lantern light in damp tunnels where the air itself tried to choke you. Your lungs filled with dust until breathing became a struggle. And the deeper you went, the less chance you had of seeing daylight again. Or perhaps you chose the open range, cattle herding, riding long hours beneath a burning sky, hat tilted low, boots in the stirrups, free as the wind. That's what the dime novels told you. The truth? Days and nights blurred together. You slept in the saddle, you ate while riding, and the cattle, they didn't follow orders. They stampeded at shadows, they kicked, they crushed, a single wrong move, and you were trampled in silence under 1,000 hooves. Rattlesnakes hid in brush and bit without warning. Scorpions crawled into boots. Coyotes waited for darkness. Bears didn't care what tools you carried. And wolves, real ones, not the metaphorical kind, hunted at the edges of the herd, eyes glowing in the firelight. You learned quickly that nature had no patience and no mercy. There were no safety rules, no helmets, no warning signs, no second chances. If something went wrong, the nearest help might be miles away, or not exist at all. Bleeding? Rapid. Broken limb? Splinted. Sickness? Work through it. No one covered for you. No one slowed down. If you stopped, you fell behind. And if you fell behind, you were replaced. No insurance, no unions, no paid time off. You worked until your body gave out. Then you worked more, because out here, rest was a privilege only the rich or the dead could afford. The rest kept moving because stopping meant slipping, and slipping meant disappearing. The sun beat down without pity. Your hands cracked and bled. Your back screamed. Your feet blistered inside worn-out boots. Still, you kept going. Not because you had strength left, but because you had no other option. This wasn't labor. It was a slow kind of sentence. A grind that broke men piece by piece until they couldn't even remember what they used to dream about. Out here, work wasn't just hard, it was hungry, and it always wanted more. You didn't need to be in a war zone to risk catching a bullet. In the West, the war followed you everywhere, into saloons, onto porches, across open streets. The battlefield was daily life, and almost everyone was armed. Guns weren't just tools, they were insurance policies, statements, warnings. Nobody asked if you carried. They assumed you did, and if you didn't, well, that was your first mistake. There were sheriffs, yes, men with tin stars and big reputations. But behind the badge, just another man trying not to be next. Most towns had one, maybe two lawmen for miles in every direction, and even those few often knew when to look the other way, because trying to stop violence out here was like trying to hold back a flood with your bare hands. You didn't just risk your job, you risked your life, and many chose silence over sacrifice. Arguments didn't escalate slowly. There were no calm discussions, no second chances. 1 minute it was words, the next, gunfire, over a spilled drink, a sideways glance, a bad card drawn at the wrong time. You could die because your voice was too loud, or your eyes lingered too long. People didn't wait for justice. They pulled iron and settled things themselves. Right or wrong didn't matter. Alive or not did. And when the shots rang out, no one screamed, no one rushed in. They ducked, they waited, and when the smoke cleared, they stepped over the body like it had always been there. Maybe someone dragged it to the edge of town. Maybe someone said a name. But justice, that was a luxury, not a guarantee. Roads were worse. Leave town, and you entered no man's land. Bandits watched the trails. They knew who traveled alone, who carried goods, who looked soft, and they didn't need reasons. They needed what you had. Wagons vanished, riders disappeared, cattle were stolen in the night, and no one ever found out where they went. If you were lucky, they left you stripped and walking. If you weren't, no one ever saw you again. People learned to walk on eggshells, speak soft, keep their backs to the wall, because even the kindest face could belong to someone desperate, angry, or just bored enough to draw. You couldn't trust the law, because often there wasn't any. You couldn't trust your neighbor, because he might need your horse more than you did. And you couldn't trust peace, because it never lasted long. Even children knew the rules. Don't touch a man's gun, don't stare too long, don't ask too many questions. People raised their sons to shoot straight and their daughters to stay quiet. The West didn't have time for mistakes. One wrong word could mean blood in the dirt and a name forgotten by morning. Here, violence wasn't the exception, it was the rhythm, and everyone danced to it. If you thought the West was brutal for men, try surviving it as a woman. The frontier didn't offer you freedom. It offered isolation, exhaustion, and the kind of silence that slowly unraveled your mind. There were no cities, no communities, no safety nets. Just vast open land and a life that demanded everything you had from the moment you woke up to the moment your body finally collapsed. And even then, it still wasn't enough. Most women lived miles from their nearest neighbor, surrounded by nothing but dust, animals, and an endless list of chores that never ended. You weren't just a wife. You were a cook, a laundress, a midwife, a field hand, a nurse, and sometimes the only adult for days in any direction. There was no rest, no break, no praise. You hauled water, chopped wood, raised children, kept fires lit, and stitched every torn piece of fabric until your fingers bled. Pregnancy came with no celebration, only fear. There were no doctors, no clinics, no clean rooms, just old towels, boiling water, and prayers. If labor went smoothly, you were lucky. If it didn't, there was no one to help you, no one to operate, no one to save you. And if you survived childbirth once, there was no guarantee you'd survive it again. Many didn't. And when pain came, from illness, from accident, or from someone's hands, there was nowhere to go, no one to tell. If your husband hit you, people looked the other way. If he drank too much and raged through the house, you waited for it to pass. There were no shelters, no laws to protect you, no one to take your side. What happened behind closed doors was considered private, and privacy here was a shield for cruelty. Not every woman had a husband, of course. Some were widowed, others abandoned, and many came west alone, chasing something better. But dreams dried up fast. With no family, no money, and no property, the options narrowed quickly. So many ended up in the only profession that didn't ask for a resume. Just your body, your silence, and your ability to endure whatever the night brought. They worked in cribs behind saloons, in tents outside mining towns, or in tiny upstairs rooms where the wallpaper peeled and the windows never opened. They were paid in coins, in food, in safety, temporary conditional safety. Their names weren't remembered, their stories weren't told. They disappeared into the shadows, overworked, underfed, and blamed for the very things they were forced to do to survive. You've heard of the frontier woman, strong and wild, pistol on her hip, hair blowing in the wind. But that image is a lie, a mask painted by men who wanted their myths to look prettier. The real women out here were stronger than that, but not because they wanted to be, because they had no choice. They endured hunger, grief, labor, and loneliness so deep it hollowed them out from the inside. They buried children, they carried secrets, and they rarely complained because no one was listening. In the end, survival wasn't a triumph, it was a sentence. And for most women on the frontier, there was no escape, only the next day, and the one after that, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would remember they were ever there at all. Step outside the town limits, and you're no longer a settler, you're a target. The border between civilization and wilderness was thin. So thin, in fact, it might vanish with a single gust of wind. Out here, just one wrong turn could leave you lost forever. The trees didn't care, the rocks didn't forgive, and the silence, once peaceful, turned sinister fast. Nature had a way of reminding people who was really in charge. Wolves circled camps at night, waiting for someone to stray too far. Cougars watched from cliffs. Bears tore through campsites for a scrap of dried meat. And then there were the storms, sand swirling thick as smoke, blinding travelers, scouring skin. Or the cold, not the kind you shake off with a blanket, but the kind that freezes your lungs from the inside out. People left on foot and vanished in minutes, their tracks gone before the snow even stopped falling. And then there were the conflicts no one wanted to talk about. Tensions that burned hotter than the sun overhead. Clashes over land, over water, over ancient territory lines drawn without maps. Riders appeared on the horizon, fast, organized, and angry. Sometimes they warned you to leave, sometimes they didn't. Settlements turned into flashpoints, campfires became beacons for danger. You learned to keep your fires low and your voice lower. Even travel between towns was its own kind of suicide mission. There were no patrols, no signals, no cavalry just over the next ridge. You were alone. If your horse stumbled, if your wheel cracked, if your guide ran off, you were done. The road became a graveyard, marked not by stones, but by what got left behind. A boot, a shattered crate, a hat full of blood. And suppose you survived the wild? Suppose you managed to make it from one dusty town to the next without getting lost, mauled, frozen, or ambushed. That didn't mean you were safe, not by a long shot, because now you had something to lose. And in the West, that meant someone else was already thinking about how to take it. Thieves didn't need masks. They operated in broad daylight, on horseback or right from the train cars. 1 minute you were riding with your goods, your tools, your hope for the future packed tight. The next, someone's got a gun in your face and a sack in your hand, demanding everything you own. And they didn't stop at the money. They took clothes, supplies, food, horses, even your boots. And if you resisted, they left you with nothing but a dirt road and a long walk, if you were lucky. Scammers were everywhere. Men who sold the same piece of land to 5 different buyers. Snake oil peddlers who promised cures and delivered poison. Traveling preachers who disappeared after collecting donations. The law wasn't built to stop them. Half the time, the law was in on it. And when the time came to complain, you'd realize something terrifying. There was no one to complain to. There were no paper trails. No fingerprints, no databases. If someone took your name, your wagon, your home, they became you. And who would prove otherwise? A man with nothing left but the clothes on his back. Not in this place, not in this world. Here, possession was 10/10 of the law, and no one was coming to help. You could wake up with a roof over your head and go to sleep in the dirt, wondering how fast it all disappeared. A misplaced trust, a poorly guarded door, a single moment of hesitation. That's all it took. Out here, luck ran dry fast. And when it did, so did your future. Morality didn't vanish overnight. It eroded quietly, like boots wearing down from endless miles of dry road. At first, people tried to hold on. They prayed. They quoted scripture. They clung to the lessons they were taught as children: right, wrong, honor, fairness. But the West had no use for those rules. Out here, kindness was often mistaken for weakness, and weakness got you erased. Killing wasn't shocking, it was efficient. A means to an end. You didn't need a reason. You just needed a situation, a bad mood, or someone looking at you the wrong way. And when it happened, people looked away. Not because they didn't care, but because they'd seen it before, over and over. Life here didn't encourage reflection. It demanded instinct. If you paused to think, you were already a step behind. Lying wasn't considered shameful. It was a defense mechanism. The truth was too fragile to survive the dust and hunger. Everyone had a story. Everyone had secrets. You lied to stay safe. You lied to keep what was yours. And eventually, you stopped noticing the lies at all. They just became part of who you were. The constant grind did something to people. You could see it in their eyes, blank, heavy, scanning for threats even in silence. Some cracked, some hardened. But almost everyone changed. The weight of surviving without pause reshaped their faces, their thoughts, their humanity. You didn't wake up one morning as someone cruel. You just slowly stopped being someone kind. It wasn't always the strongest who lasted. It was the ones who could turn off their conscience when it got in the way. The ones who could shut out guilt, sorrow, hesitation. The ones who could take, use, abandon, and walk away without a glance. And each time you were faced with a choice, to help or ignore, to share or hoard, to show mercy or strike first, you chipped away a little more of the person you used to be. No one said it out loud, but the question was always there. Would you rather become something you feared or be buried as something you loved? Survival in this world came at a price, and for many, the cost was their soul. Now, take a breath. Still dreaming of the Wild West? Do you still see it the same way you did at the beginning? The open plains, the crack of hooves, the promise of freedom? Or do you see the hunger, the violence, the cold stare of a stranger sizing you up from across a bar? Everything you've heard, everything you've imagined, it was a myth, polished and romanticized until it gleamed like gold. But the truth was bone deep. It was blisters and bullets. It was betrayal and silence. It was a place where only those willing to abandon their conscience stood a chance of waking up the next day. Out here, survival wasn't about heroism. It was about grit, about learning when to run, when to fight, and when to shut yourself off just to make it through another night. That wasn't a movie. That wasn't a legend. That was life. You wouldn't have survived, not because you weren't strong enough, but because you still believe in decency. And now you understand why that's exactly what would have gotten you killed.